Good morning, everyone. It's Friday, November 9th, 2018, and this is Raphael Garcia. And I'm back for episode two. Finally, I'm not going to miss a day again, but I'm back for episode two of the Let's Chat Wrestling podcast, where we're here to talk about professional wrestling from a topical standpoint. We're not doing recaps, as I always say. We're going to stay away from doing so many recaps, but we're here to talk about professional wrestling and some of the more interesting topics that I see going on in the industry today. This morning, I almost said tonight, but this morning I would like to talk about the idea of bad booking and what does that mean within the professional wrestling space, mainly the World Wrestling Entertainment promotion. But before we do that, as always, I want to say thank you for taking the time to listen to our content. Thank you for liking our content. Please be sure to share everything that we do across social media at MMAratings.net. You can find me and Shawan talking about mixed martial arts every Thursday during our MMA Ratings podcast, and then you can find a lot of our written pieces by myself, Shawan, and a couple other guys, Adam Martin, and some other names within the industry. And we're also bringing you some pro wrestling coverage, something new we're testing out. I've been wanting to launch a pro wrestling podcast, so we finally got it up and running. And yeah, episode two, here we go. So let's talk about the idea of bad booking and exactly what it is in the industry and how it's impacting the WWE from a week in and week out basis. So first thing I always want to say about this topic is that bad booking does not necessarily mean, well, it doesn't mean, period, booking that people do not like or agree with. That's one thing. If everyone has an opinion about who should be put over, who should put over who should have what titles, who should be in what positions within the promotion. That's one thing. Totally understood. But the other aspect of the conversation is booking that just doesn't flat out make sense. That is a different space. And oftentimes people get the two confused. Just because someone doesn't like potential booking doesn't mean it's bad. It may be pushing booking in a different direction. It may be doing something that kind of takes off down the line. No one really has the foresight to say what will and will not work. But everyone can kind of tell what's bad booking. And I always thought about this conversation back when CM Punk did his appearance on Colt Cabana's podcast back when they were friends, and they were talking about his final kind of years in the WWE and when he would be presented different storylines or different outcomes or different booking options. He would always ask, "What then? What?" And what that means is that he was pushing to see what did creative have in mind for him next, or the next step in the story. And he was pushing back because oftentimes they didn't have a next step in the story. And I think that that's where we are in professional wrestling, or not in professional wrestling as a whole, but that's where we are in the WWE as a whole, because there's a variety of examples of where there's booking done that happens on TV, and you're almost like, well, what's next? What's supposed to occur next? And it just doesn't make sense. It seems disjointed. It seems you can tell that they're kind of flying by the seat of their pants, and they're not creating long-term plans for everyone. And it's very apparent every time you watch the show week in and week out. Like, I want to give some examples. I want to start with 6 women that I love in the ring, where we have the ongoing feud between the Riot Squad and Sasha, Bailey, and Natalya. Now, what's interesting about this is that I'm a big fan of 5 of the 6 women in this conversation here. Sarah Logan, I'm not too sold on her, but the rest of the group, I'm definitely fans of. I think Ruby Riott is probably one of the MVPs of on the WWE roster this year, because she's just been getting the job done. And I remember how heartbroken I was when she was originally hurt, and I was hoping that she wasn't going to miss too much time. But they wrestled again on Monday, and we all saw the outcome of Ruby breaking Natalia's father's glasses. The recently passed Jim Neidhart. She broke his glasses, and the match ended in a weird no contest where they should have been counted out or something like that. Whatever it really was. But this was their third time in 3 weeks facing off against each other. They wrestled at Evolution, where the Riot Squad lost. Sasha Bailey and Natalya got the win, and what was a good match, a very good match. I enjoyed that. And they wrestled the following Monday. They wrestled because it was the Riot Squad, Alicia, and Mickey against Sasha, Bailey, Natalya, Trish, and Lita. So we saw that match, and again, that group lost. And then they had this match. But my question is, what's next? Because it doesn't seem like there's a next step in this story. Is it that this is going to push for a Natalya heel turn? Is it that this is going to cause some type of rift between those three, and maybe we'll finally get Sasha and Bailey? I don't know, but none of that makes sense if you look at how they've booked all 5 women in recent months. So here you have 6 women who can go in the ring, who can put on a good match, even whether it be in a tag format or a singles match. They've done good work all year, but the fact that there isn't any storyline around them going forward, it makes their matches meaningless. It makes them not have any consequences, and that's an issue there. Booking without consequences really kind of devalues the performances that the men and women are putting in the ring, putting forth in the ring. Having a good storyline behind it makes it that much more interesting, that much more intriguing, and it elevates a match. If you have a great match that doesn't have any stakes around it, yes, it'll still be a great match. It'll still be something good to see. But if it's a match that has some stakes, that has a reason why, there's a reason why this type of match is important. There's a reason why this storyline, this outcome has everybody grabbed. That is what will keep people in. I'll give you some examples of when the WWE has been doing it right recently and when they've been doing it wrong. There's some correlation between the responses that you'll see within matches in both spaces. So let's talk about an example of when the WWE has been doing it wrong. So I already used the Riot Squad, so I guess I'll use Samoa Joe next. I'm just looking at some of my notes now. Samoa Joe should be one. I'm surprised he has not held an important title in WWE to date. I think other than the NXT title. And the reason why I say that is because we all know what type of athlete Samoa Joe is. We all know what type of wrestler he is, what type of matches he's capable of putting on, what type of storylines he's able to present to the fan base. We're all already aware of that. But since coming up to the main roster, he's been stagnant, for lack of a better word. There hasn't been any push behind him. Even when he first came in and he accidentally hurt Seth Rollins during that run-in against Triple H, nothing has ever been really done with him. He was fed to Brock Lesnar in a moment where, in that great match, I mean, the match that him and Brock Lesnar had was different. It's a different style of match, and even though he was eventually squashed out at the end, people were invested in him because there was some type of storyline built around that brief moment when they were pitted against each other, and it was exciting. I mean, I remember watching that match and almost watching it standing up the whole time, just because you knew Brock Lesnar was going to win. We all knew he was going to win, but there was a slight hope there that Samoa Joe can find a way to pull it out. But of course, it did not happen. But since he's been over on SmackDown, his storyline with AJ felt rushed. If the luster of what everyone knew was coming because of what these two had done in TNA was missing. and I think that is due to how these two guys were booked. We oftentimes within the WWE rushed into situations, and I felt like they rushed into this match. Now, the last one they didn't really have too much of an ability to change just because of Daniel Bryan pulling out of WWE Crown Jewel, which everyone should have. But that's neither here nor there. We're not going to talk about that topic. But seeing Samoa Joe and the way he's being used today in the WWE makes me not concerned, because I mean it's already too late, but he is another victim of bad booking. When they were in NXT, that's one thing. And we'll talk about an NXT example that has been standing out, or that has stood out to me recently. But this is the example of Samoa Joe on the WWE roster, and specifically within SmackDown, is a moment where you just have to wonder, well, how do they correct this? How do they correct his position as a monster heel? He's actually one of the few heels on the WWE roster, few like legit heels that get heat. And yeah, he's still popular, he's still cheered, but Samoa Joe can get some heat if he's given the opportunity, but he's not booked into the opportunity to do so. I would love to see, I mean, a feud between Joe and Styles could be something that lasts a whole year. And I think everyone would be okay with that, looking at what types of matches these two guys can put forth and put together. But right now, creative is just not at a point where it does that anymore. And there have been situations where they do those types of storylines, and we've seen how they've kind of played out well in the past. Like, let's look at back when there was a situation where it looked like Sasha and Bayley were going to split, and they were going to have that feud that everyone wanted to see. The moment where, you know, we saw the incessant Bayley kind of getting shit canned by Sasha every turn of the way. We saw it in the Rumble, and that was at WrestleMania. We saw it at Elimination Chamber, where Sasha kicked her off the top of the cage, or top of the pod, excuse me. We saw it time and time again, and that moment when Bayley snapped and attacked Sasha, that was when the feud would have been at its hottest. That should have been something that was pushed into the main event space. Just have them brawl for the next 1 to 2 weeks, or even that next 1 week, and that could have set up a storyline that everybody would have been invested in. Instead, they turned down the path of the friendship therapy, and the storyline went completely away. We know at some point in time we're going to get Sasha versus Bayley on the main roster. We know that. But that segue to the friendship therapy, how that was booked, it just didn't make any sense. It took what could have been a serious storyline and something that could have been intriguing, focusing on two prominent women on the roster, and it made them look like jokes, both of them. And now they're all smiling and hugging and cheering each other on again. And you have to wonder, is this going to happen? And if not, when? Or excuse me, if it will happen, when? Because right now it just doesn't seem to be the case. I mean, the WWE women's roster is focused on Ronda Rousey and nothing else. So there almost isn't any space for any other women to have any major storylines there. But this right here just doesn't seem... This is just another example of when there was a disservice done, because we know what Sasha and Bayley can do in the ring together. We've seen their work. We saw their work at NXT TakeOver Brooklyn 2. We saw all their work up through NXT since they've been on the main roster. But it just didn't seem like the right type of outcome for how that feud, and I'm using the term feud in air quotes, how that situation should have come to fruition. Was it badly booked? I'm definitely going to agree with that as well. And as I said, I wanted to talk about an example of when the WWE is doing it correctly. And what I mean by correctly is if you look at the outcome of the matches and the reaction and response to the matches that the match I'm about to start talking about. So Johnny Gargano and Tommaso Ciampa in NXT has been one of the more intriguing storylines within the WWE. in recent time. And the reason why a lot of that is the case is some of it's been manufactured and some of it's just been bad luck. When Ciampa was injured right before the Takeover ladder match against AOP, I feel like there were some hints that he was going to turn heel. The way that the heel turn was done after the main event, as the show was going off, it was good, classic heel turn stuff, and it got the crowd some heat all the way behind him. Luckily and unluckily for the WWE, Ciampa was hurt and he was out for an extended period of time. I think he was almost out for a whole year, and that set the slow burn for Gargano to go off and go do something else without having the answers as to why Ciampa turned on him, but always knowing everyone knew that was going to come back up at some point in time. The question of when that was going to come back up was really the case. But even so, that is not where the feud between Ciampa and Gargano started. If you go back to the Cruiserweight Classic, yes, these two guys have history beyond each other outside the WWE, which has been acknowledged. But if you go back to the Cruiserweight Classic, their first round match was against each other. And that was a match, it was one of the best matches in that series. It had the best storyline in the Cruiserweight Classic just because, these two guys are tag team partners, and Ciampa didn't want to put Gargano away. He kind of hesitated a couple times to put him away, which is something that they harkened back to in their first match within this feud, but that set the stage for what was to come. So they went from the Cruiserweight Classic, both men lose the tournament at various points. Then they become tag team champions together, but they don't get to, they don't hold the titles for an extended period of time, but they are champions. And they get wrapped up in that feud of consistently fighting for the titles and trying to get back to that point, but it didn't happen. At the end of the day, we would see them split, and Gargano's knee injury kept him out of wrestling for quite a while. Now, when he did come back, he came back at the perfect time when Gargano was feuding with Andre Almas for the title, and it set up, this is what we want to see next. It set up the situation where you knew Gargano and Ciampa were going to be next, and it was such a big story for NXT at the time that it overshadowed the heavyweight title. Aleister Black had won the belt from Almas, and he was the champion, but it overshadowed everything that he did. And it overshadowed it in a way where this was the main story going on within NXT, and it was almost good that it wasn't for the belt, because I think it would have lessened that storyline just a little bit. But it did get to a situation where the title was on the line. We saw three excellent matches between the two, and they continued to one-up themselves. I talked about on the last show, every time I watched NXT, one of the takeover events, I asked myself, how can these guys consistently one-up themselves? And they keep finding a way to do it. And Gargano and Ciampa, they did that with every match that they had. The last man standing match, I think it was good. There was a couple of slow spots, but it was definitely very good. But they've done the right thing since, in my opinion. They've gone away from it just enough that they can come back to it. When they included Gargano in the title feud between Aleister and Ciampa, that gave it that gave the story there an interesting wrinkle, because you didn't know how that was going to really play out. We see these triple threats go one way or another, and now with the storyline going around that Gargano attacked Black, are we seeing a shift in Gargano becoming a heel? Like, that is that conversation that's going on now. And it's also interesting because does that mean that him and Ciampa are going to kind of reform in some way, shape, or some in some way that matters? It's funny because when Gargano initially turned and attacked Aleister, Ciampa tweeted out nothing but those three black hearts, and I've always laughed and joked. But what if one heart is for him, one heart is for Gargano, and the other heart is for Candice LeRae? So you don't really know how the storyline can go, and that's what's so important about good booking, is that it keeps you wondering, well, what's going to happen next? I should watch because I want to know how the storyline is going to play out. Yeah, wrestling has some predictability to it, which is always great, but the unpredictability to it also keeps people within their seats, and it keeps people tuned in week in and week out. So that is probably my biggest example of good booking within the WWE. Outside of that, you find it all over the place. I mean, look at Kenny Omega and Okada. That was going on in New Japan. Okada was consistently beating Omega, figuring out a new way to do it weekend, or excuse me, match in big match and big match after another. He was finding a way to defeat Omega. We knew at some point in time Omega was going to get the win, but we just didn't know when it was going to come. And when it did, that was a big moment. It was definitely a big moment to me, and what helped these two become, I think they were 1 and 2 in the PWI 500, because that storyline that traveled, that storyline that was stretched over a year, was important. Even that third match they gave was a little bit soon. It could have been stretched out longer, but that didn't stop these two from excelling within the ring. And I mean, they've given us some of the best matches of this generation easily, but the payoff of that storyline and the payoff of it coming so slowly is exactly what made that so enjoyable to watch, and I enjoyed it from start to finish. The question about bad booking is whether or not it's an easy fix. I don't necessarily think it's an easy fix per se. I think that it takes, there's a couple of different things that need to occur for the idea of bad booking to be fixed, and I'm using fix in air quotes because we know that writers within the WWE don't have a lot of say. They don't have a lot of power. Then they're writing for what Vince McMahon likes. We've seen that in multiple times. We've seen that in the past. Until they're given the opportunity to be, I hate to say be more creative, but have a little bit more freedom, I don't think we're going to see anything really change in that area. We see some differences in NXT, which is what Triple H runs. The booking and storyline telling there is totally different in a positive manner, and I think that that's something that will eventually occur on the main roster as well too. But we just don't have the opportunity to get there yet. And there are times where WWE Creative on the main roster has tried out the extended version of storytelling, the extended booking space. Like look at Roman Reigns chasing after Brock Lesnar. That didn't come, it didn't come out the way everybody wanted it to, with Roman being the conquering champion that everyone cheered. I mean, he will be when he comes back, just because of what he'll be conquering something totally different. But at that time, when he did finally defeat Brock Lesnar, it was just kind of like ho hum, because the whole situation was just poorly conceived from start to finish. But the WWE has tried different things, and when they do try different things, it can get pretty exciting. I mean, let's see where that Chad Gable and what's his name, Bobby Roode storyline, where that segues into. Maybe we get that heel turn for Roode that we've been clamoring for since he's been brought up to the main roster. There's opportunity there left and right, but in reality, we just don't know what the outcome is going to be, and the faith that WWE Creative will have the right outcome, or have an outcome that makes sense, the faith in that is kind of minimal right now. We haven't seen too much of that, and it's unfortunate, but that's just kind of the situation that we are right now within that promotion. So it's a space where there is area for improvement, but we just don't know if we're going to get that improvement. We can look across the WWE roster and we see so many talented men and women, top to bottom. I mean, people who are on the shows from week in, week out basis, to people who are not on the shows, and it's unfortunate that a lot of them don't get that space, and there's a variety of reasons why. But inconsistent booking is part of it as well. We need to get to a point where 50-50 booking is done away with, and we can just get to a space where it's just something totally different. So with that in mind, I'm gonna go ahead and close this show out. You know, every time you watch these events and you watch these matches, always ask yourself, what's next? What's next in the storyline? What's next for the men and women involved? And if it gets you intrigued and excited, hold on to that, embrace that. But if it just seems disjointed and just like more like fluff, you know, react the same way, or not the same way. Excuse me. Just react the opposite way, and just kind of, you know, it is what it is. But we should all push for better booking and reward those, and those who are involved with better booking should definitely be rewarded as an athlete and as the creative minds behind the scenes. But with that in mind, as always, I want to say thank you for listening to another edition of the MMA Ratings Podcast. I appreciate you. Excuse me, this is not the MMA. My fault. The Let's Chat Wrestling Podcast. Let's Talk Wrestling, whatever the heck I'm going to call this. But I apologize. This is episode 2 of the Let's Talk Wrestling Podcast, and we'll be back next Wednesday for another edition of the show, looking at topics as well. So if you always want to follow my content, give me feedback, give me topic ideas, or ask questions, you can reach me at rgarcia_sports. You can check us out on Instagram and Twitter at mmaratings.net. And as always, you can also you can catch my wrestling content over at dailyddt.com, which is within the Fansided Network. I just put up a piece about Braun Strowman and whether or not he's going to have a career like Kane, where Kane was never the man, but he was a good role player. I think Braun Strowman is kind of headed towards that situation, even though there was a brief moment where he was like the hottest name on the roster. That moment has now been stamped out. But go check out that piece. Check out a lot of other great work that's circling on that site as well. So with that in mind, thank you for listening to another edition of the show, and we will be back next week. Have a great weekend, everybody. Stay safe.